Discover 5 powerful stories of wrongful convictions, corruption, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Picture this. A rising boxing star's life is turned upside down when he's wrongfully convicted of a triple murder. Rubin "Hurricane" Carter's promising career was cut short, forcing him to spend decades fighting not in the ring, but for his freedom against a deeply flawed justice system. Rubin "Hurricane" Carter was a middleweight boxer with dreams of becoming a world champion when his life took a tragic turn. In 1966, 3 people were shot dead in a New Jersey bar, and despite a lack of physical evidence, Carter and another man, John Artis, were arrested and charged with the murders. The case against Carter was largely based on the testimonies of 2 convicted criminals who claimed they saw Carter at the scene. These witnesses later recanted their statements, admitting they had been coerced by the police. However, the damage was done. Carter and Artis were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Carter's first conviction was overturned in 1976, but a retrial led to a second conviction. This time, the case became a global cause célèbre, with celebrities and activists rallying behind Carter, believing he had been targeted due to his race and outspoken nature. In 1985, nearly 20 years after the murders, Carter's conviction was overturned for the second time by a federal judge, who ruled that the prosecution had been based on racism rather than reason and concealment rather than disclosure. Carter was finally released, having spent 2 decades fighting to clear his name and expose the injustices he endured.
It is over.
Rubin "Hurricane" Carter's battle for justice highlights the systemic flaws in the criminal justice system, particularly the role of racial prejudice. His story remains a powerful testament to the importance of perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds and the quest for truth. Imagine being 16 years old, thrown into one of the most notorious jails in America without a trial, and left to languish for years. This is the tragic and harrowing tale of a young man whose life was stolen by a system that failed him at every turn. The name Kalief Browder became synonymous with the fight for justice. In 2010, Kalief Browder was walking home from a party in the Bronx when he was suddenly arrested for allegedly stealing a backpack. Unable to pay the $3,000 bail, he was sent to Rikers Island to await trial. What should have been a brief stay turned into a nearly 3-year ordeal, during which Browder endured brutal beatings by inmates and guards, extended periods in solitary confinement, and relentless psychological torment. Browder consistently maintained his innocence, refusing to plead guilty to a crime he didn't commit, which prolonged his detention. The legal system continued to fail Browder, as his trial was repeatedly delayed, with crucial witnesses failing to appear and the prosecution lacking sufficient evidence. Despite the overwhelming pressure, Browder refused to admit guilt. Finally, in 2013, the charges against him were dismissed, and he was released. But the years of trauma had already taken a devastating toll. Kalief struggled to adjust to life outside of prison, haunted by his experiences. His story gained national attention, sparking outrage over the injustices within the criminal justice system. In 2015, at just 22 years old, Kalief Browder took his own life, a tragic end to a life marked by injustice and suffering. His death ignited calls for reform, leading to significant changes in New York's bail and prison systems, and his legacy continues to fuel the fight for justice. Imagine being convicted of murder at 18, your life turned upside down by a crime you insist you didn't commit. This is the gripping tale of a young man whose case became the center of international attention, revealing deep flaws in the justice system. The story of Adnan Syed is one of persistence, doubt, and eventual redemption. In 1999, Hae Min Lee, a high school student in Baltimore, was found murdered in a shallow grave. Her ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed, was quickly arrested and later convicted of her murder, based largely on the testimony of a fellow student, Jay Wilds, who claimed he helped Syed bury the body. The case against Syed hinged on this testimony and questionable cell phone records that placed him at the scene. Despite maintaining his innocence, Syed was sentenced to life in prison. His case faded into obscurity until 2014, when the podcast serial brought it back into the public eye, casting doubt on the evidence and trial proceedings. The podcast raised critical questions about Wilde's inconsistent statements, the reliability of the cell phone records, and Syed's ineffective defense. Following the podcast, Syed's case gained widespread attention, sparking debates about the fairness of his trial. In 2016, a court vacated Syed's conviction, citing ineffective counsel, and granted him a new trial. After years of legal battles, in 2022, Syed was released after a judge ruled that the prosecution had failed to disclose key evidence that could have exonerated him. The case is still under scrutiny, but Syed is now free, a symbol of both the power of media and the potential for justice to prevail, even after decades. Adnan Syed's case exposed significant flaws in the criminal justice system and the power of investigative journalism. His journey from a life sentence to freedom underscores the need for transparency and fairness, and his story continues to inspire those fighting for justice.
Imagine being wrongfully convicted of murder and placed on death row, only to fight for years to prove your innocence. This is the harrowing journey of Walter McMillian, whose case exposed deep flaws in the justice system. In 1986, Walter McMillian, a black man, was arrested for the murder of a white woman named Rhonda Morrison in Monroeville, Alabama. Despite having numerous alibi witnesses placing him at a church fish fry during the crime, McMillian was convicted based on the testimony of a criminal who claimed to have seen him at the scene. The trial lasted only a day and a half, and McMillian was swiftly sentenced to death. His case caught the attention of Brian Stevenson, a young lawyer from the Equal Justice Initiative, who discovered overwhelming evidence of McMillian's innocence. Stevenson exposed multiple inconsistencies and fabrications in the prosecution's case, including suppressed evidence and coerced witness testimony. In 1993, after years of legal battles, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals overturned McMillian's conviction, and he was released from death row. His story gained national attention and highlighted systemic issues within the justice system, including racial bias and the risk of executing innocent people. Walter McMillian's exoneration revealed profound injustices and the dangers of wrongful convictions. His fight for freedom continues to inspire efforts for legal reforms and the protection of individual rights.
Imagine spending your entire adulthood in prison for a crime you didn't commit. This is the story of three men who were wrongfully convicted as teenagers, forced to endure decades behind bars, and how they fought against all odds to clear their names and reclaim their freedom. In 1983, the murder of 14-year-old DeWitt Duckett in Baltimore sent shockwaves through the community. The pressure to solve the case quickly led police to arrest three black teenagers, Alfred Chestnut, Ransom Watkins, and Andrew Stewart, despite a lack of physical evidence. The case hinged on the coerced testimonies of other students, who later recanted, admitting they were pressured by law enforcement to falsely identify the three boys as the culprits. Compounding this injustice, the prosecution withheld critical evidence that could have exonerated the teenagers, evidence pointing to a different suspect seen fleeing the scene. The trial was swift, and the three teens were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Over the next 36 years, Chestnut, Watkins, and Stewart lived in the shadow of this grave injustice. In 2019, a breakthrough came when Chestnut uncovered hidden case files that contradicted the prosecution's story and implicated another person. With this new evidence, their legal team presented the case to the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office. After re-examining the evidence, it became clear that the three men were innocent. On November 25, 2019, they were finally exonerated and released, but not before losing nearly 4 decades of their lives to a crime they didn't commit. The exoneration of Alfred Chestnut, Ransom Watkins, and Andrew Stewart is a poignant reminder of the flaws in the justice system. Their perseverance and eventual vindication underscore the urgent need for legal reforms to prevent such miscarriages of justice in the future.